a consulting career that is advising, mentoring, empowering people. When careers are driven by that kind of passion and enthusiasm, they have enormous fuel and breadth, taking storytelling and using it for a force for good.
You can talk and you can write and you can communicate, but ultimately it has to land somewhere.
Environment is really what makes the biggest difference. An environment that is a blank canvas, inspired by nature, that is welcoming, nourishing, supportive, expansive and varied works best for me.
I'm going to create a meeting of the mighty.
You'll spend 80,000 hours at work. You're here because you want those hours to count. Hi, I'm Zoe Schofield.
And I'm Erica Sosna. A warm welcome to the Career Equation podcast. On this podcast, we take time out from our award-winning careers consultancy to share a game-changing formula to help you solve the sum of your life.
Each week, we and our guests use the career equation to explore their story so far and help them unlock the secrets of a fulfilling career.
Welcome to the Career Equation podcast. I'm absolutely delighted and excited to be joined by my podcasting mentor in all her glory, Gilly Smith. Gilly, you're a food writer, a podcaster, a mentor with huge experience and many, many books in the biography of food folk, including 2 about Jamie Oliver, 1 about Nigella Lawson, and all kinds of different food agendas, squeezing the stories and the richness out of the grub that we eat. So it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to the podcast today.
Thank you, and a great pleasure to be your first guest. How exciting.
So exciting. Today, we're going to be diving a little bit into your key career conundrum at the moment, which is about how do I take my huge expertise, background, and all the different value that I can add and start to build that into a consulting career that is advising, mentoring, empowering people who want to do something like you've already done. I wondered if we could start with you giving us a kind of heads up of all the kind of seasons, quadrants, fields in which you inhabit and how that might guide our conversation.
I'm essentially a journalist. That is what I have been doing all my life. It started in television, it went into radio. I then started writing, largely because I had children and I really wanted to be able to work from home. But as a 22-year-old, I found myself following my passion into television. It was passion first. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a career plan. It was just those 2 things. I wanted to make a change in the world and I wanted to do something different every day. And I ended up working for Bob Geldof for Sport Aid. I knew in that moment that that is what I wanted to do. I wanted to make an impact. I wanted to do something that really changed people's minds and was exciting. So I went to work for Bob Geldof. I was doing programs about food, but although it was malnutrition and it was the impact of markets failing on malnutrition in the Philippines and Guatemala, and I wouldn't have called myself a food journalist at all. It was much, much, much later. In fact, when I was teaching journalism at the University of Brighton, that I was telling students what I'd done and putting that story together in retrospect was how I realized that I'd always been communicating about the impact of food on people's lives and the politics of food and the culture of food. It all came out of passion first.
When careers are driven by that kind of passion and enthusiasm, they have enormous fuel and breadth. And that's something I really noticed when I was looking at all the things that you had accomplished in your career. It's almost like you are iterating and continuing to explore the form, but the interest, the curiosity about the storytelling, the culture, and food as your kind of subject of choice.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, looking at what I want to do is actually what I'm doing. It's certainly what I did with you. I was asked to write the podcasting book, which you read and then got in touch with me about. I literally have not told really anybody that I do this kind of work. I don't even have a name for it. I don't know, creative strategy consultant, which it just doesn't sound like me at all, but it's exactly what it is. So I'm so freelance in nature. I'm free-spirited. I love the creative. Actually pinning myself into that kind of little corner to give myself a brand is very against all that I do. But I understand how the world works, and so you have to do it.
So there's some resistance in a way to the formatting of your idea, but a lot of clarity about what it feels like and what shape it takes and the benefits that it brings. People have been finding you, but now we're getting curious about, so what's the next level up from that?
Yeah, absolutely that. Yeah. It is what I do with all the people who come to my retreats and who come to me for that kind of consultancy. I just need to do it for myself, or rather get you to do it for me.
Right. Well, hopefully the time we're going to spend together will really help to accelerate your clarity around that and for us to work together to define what those next steps might look and feel like. I love defining a consulting proposition. I ask all of our guests to answer 4 questions that are loosely framed around our career equation. And the career equation says, if you use your skills, you apply it to something that you love, and you create an impact that's meaningful for you, you can have a thriving career. And the environment in which you do that can really make or break you. So understanding who you are and where you do your best work is also crucial. So we're going to go into 4 stories, 4 moments from your life that help us to explore those components specifically for you in more detail. So I'd love you to start with telling me about a moment where you just knew that you were good at something.
Something I've noticed when I'm talking to creatives, writers, podcasters, anyone who is a storyteller, a communicator of any sort, is that there is this internal quality of their childhood. And my story was exactly that. I was a second child. By the time I was born, there was a massive drama going on that kind of excluded me. So I was a very sort of quiet child who was very patient. I sort of popped inside my head and became a very imaginative person, playing with dolls' houses and creating scenarios and spending really all my time, really, until I went to boarding school at 10, pretty much on my own. And that interior landscape was where I began to play, where I began to make up stories, and was perfectly self-contained, which of course sets up the most perfect environment for a freelance storyteller, journalist, communicator. I'm very happy on my own.
So that experience then of living in your own world, generating stories, ideas, and experiences was in some ways initiated as a kind of relief mechanism to escape some of the contextual environment that you were in that was painful and uncomfortable. But it also sounds like it's something that came very naturally to you, the idea of narrative and constructing that and weaving that in a way that was engrossing for you and potentially for others. Where did you pick that up, do you think?
Well, my father was in the army, but in those days you could make up your own job, and he made his own up as a storyteller. He was a sort of a PR kind of person for the army. So he used to make films about our lads on the slopes in Austria and send them back to Welsh television stations. And also in our lives, he would document everything. He was always taking photographs. He wrote the family history. He would interview my grandfather about his role in the Second World War. So I was surrounded by that kind of capturing and getting people to unpack. I'm very much my father's daughter.
So this was an inherited quality, something you had that was all around you, that was kind of immersing you anyway, the value of story, the value of people's history, the ability to spin, I guess, if you was in the PR space as well. Like, how do you make that engaging, compelling, punchy, work your audience? All of that you grew up in. And then you also went on to study communication studies. How did that inform your thinking and your practice at being good at crafting a great story?
Well, again, I often find that people's decisions come as a resistance to something else. And I had a place at Sussex University to do French and European studies. I went off for my gap year to spend a year in Paris. Ahead of that, and during that time in Paris, I had a complete epiphany. I did not want to be a translator for NATO. I didn't want to work in that world. I wanted to be curious. I didn't want to be telling somebody else's stories. But also I was quite political at that time. And my mother said to me, I think you're a journalist. My God, my mother wasn't one to feed back and tell me what she thought of me very often, but she saw that in me and she was right. I'd never even considered that. And my mother went to the library and she found journalism courses, and she found this one at Coventry, which was groundbreaking. The Birmingham Centre for Contemporary Cultural Studies was just in its infancy. Stuart Hall, Richard Hoggart, really big, important thinkers were thinking about messaging, communications, mass media just at that time. It was 1981 that I went. And, things were changing massively. And I was just blown away by this course. I jumped ship from Sussex to Coventry, spent 3 years in the rain. But it was the most important time of my life. I was surrounded by people who were political and talking about ideology and film studies, going to the film sock and watching French cinema. And it was wild. It was absolutely brilliant. And it made me realise that thinking was the most important thing to do. Finding your tribe, talking to people, having your mind blown was something that I just really loved.
I love that. Having my mind blown was something I really enjoyed. And I really get that. I think when university experiences are their best, you get the opportunity to work alongside, be friends with, learn from bright, interesting people with a perspective very different and a skill set very different to yours. And I think that is one of the primary attributes of a university experience. And it sounds like as well, you were fortunate in terms of your timing because of what was blowing up within your field of journalism and comms. It sounds very exciting. Your second moment, I know we talk about passion, and tell me about that.
I was writing a book about Jamie Oliver. Nobody'd written a real biography of Jamie Oliver, and it was fine. It went out in the first edition, but they came back and they asked for a second edition. And during that time, it was all about the school dinners, and he'd become incredibly political. And as I talked to people about the impact that he had had, I just woke up. I mean, I'd been pretty awake before, but not in that way. I realized that actually there was a movement that I really wanted to join. And the more that I dug into that, the more people I interviewed. My style of writing books is very interview driven. I was on fire, and I really enjoyed feeling like that. Funnily enough, because my children were still quite young, I chose to use that fire to go and work at university. I went to teach journalism, television and radio journalism in particular, at Brighton University, because I wanted to communicate that passion and light the fire of young people so that they could go off and do it. So I wrote a book for them, which was Taste of the TV Chef, which was how TV taught us to eat, but also about the power of storytelling to save the planet. And that took a long time because I turned that from an academic book that I was writing at the university into a book for, public consumption. And that's when I left university and I started podcasting for Delicious Podcast, pioneer in food podcasting back in 2016, and took all that fire and put it into storytelling and podcasting. And that's really when I grew up, I suppose. I was in my 50s at that point, and it took me a long time to put all those pieces together. And I suppose give myself permission to join that movement myself. I was still holding the microphone out to other people, interviewing them about why they were changing the world. But this time I wasn't getting students to do it on my behalf. I was holding that microphone myself.
That's such a powerful origin story, I think, to this idea of taking storytelling and using it for a force for good. And as you described, the use of the podcast, the ability to broadcast beyond formal radio is actually really quite young. So I really hear you saying you then took matters into your own hands and went, hang on. I mean, you were invited to do the podcast, I Know Delicious, but you had this skill set, you then transferred it and have replicated that into lots of different agendas, series, subject matters. I'm guessing that democratization of the ability to people get out there and do and say what they want to say is part of what ignites your fire and why you're excited about working with other people to see if you can help them get over that bridge and do it well. Is that right?
Exactly that. It is that democratization. It is nobody's going to commission me because I've actually tried to get my current podcast, Cooking the Books, onto Radio 4. It's been through the offers and it's been turned down, and it's an absolute Radio 4 gold. I mean, I have a weekly show where I interviewed top food writers, and it would absolutely sit on Radio 4. But I was told that I am too old to join the Radio 4 family. They will take people in at 30 and grow them and keep them there into their 50s and 60s, but I am too old. as a woman, particularly, to join the Radio 4 family. Nobody's going to stop me doing what I do. And podcasting is a fabulous opportunity to do that, as is writing, as is substacking. All social media is a wonderful democratization process. It bypasses the commissioning process. If people want to listen to you and hear what you have to say, they will. There's no white bloke with a yay or a nay. It is absolutely up to you and the quality of what you have to say.
It's actually quite depressing to hear here how ageist and blinkered the BBC seem to be being in response to Gilly. Leaders in firms, please, my coaching is to really challenge your internal biases. We focus a lot on the energy and the need of our Gen Zs, but too often I'm hearing from talented, older, experienced professionals with a huge amount to give that they're being sidelined purely on age grounds. Why is that? Consider the experience, the network, the capability, the wisdom that you miss out on by judging on numbers alone. Tell me a story then about the kinds of impact you've been able to have as a result of this direct channel and uncensored Gilly Smith.
You know, you can talk and you can write and you can communicate, but ultimately it has to land somewhere. And sadly, the old traditional awards are the validation that works. And getting awards for all the things that I've done recently really helped. The Delicious podcast was nominated for a Fortnum & Mason's Award up against the Food Programme and Kitchen Cabinet, which are the leaders in the field, and Radio 4 programmes, of course, within 6 months of starting it. That was massive. Wow. And it kind of gave me that sort of, okay, we must be doing something right here, because you don't get a lot of feedback, enough to really validate it. It has to be external. And then I started getting nominated pretty much every year. I won the Geldof Food Writers Award for Cooking the Books in 2022, having been nominated again for the Fortnum & Mason's twice, and again this year, up against the Food Programme again. No chance of ever winning against the Food Programme. Of course, they've got all the budget and all the brilliance, and so they should absolutely win. But Taste and TV Chef won the Gourmand Award in the food writing category. That was fantastic. And it also won the International Impact Award in academic publishing, which was huge. So, you know, those sort of validations really, really matter. But I think the most important change that I see is in the retreats that I do, because there are always tears when people have that moment where they hear their voice for the first time, where they are given permission. Somebody who I do a one-on-one with now, this sort of mentoring that's come out of the retreats, she wrote me an email the other day, she's saying, "You've given me permission to shine." That is enormous for me. It's not just one person, because her permission to shine means that she will go out and shine with a whole load of other people. Mentoring you to get to this point where you're making this podcast, which is your voice. It will do brilliantly. I know it will, because you have this fabulous ability, this equation, which will change people's lives.
One of the things I really picked up in the book when I heard you talking about that was how distinctive and unique each of those voices are, and how much your expertise and insight about what makes a good story, what makes a good format and structure, really helps that person to bring their voice out and to have the best opportunity for that to be heard and captured in an effective way. And I think that encapsulation is something that, as someone without the background that you have, it's really difficult to do. You might know what you like to do or who you want to speak to, but how you do that is a whole science, and you've spent a lifetime's career working out. And I think that really massively accelerates and also helps to build people's confidence that they can do it, and that we don't have to have everything. We can have our idea, we can have the opportunity to use the tech and the platform, and then we can access some specialist support from someone who really knows how to make this one work. I think that's always really helpful. And I know you said in your book that so many people get pod fade, they give up within 3 to 5 episodes. And I can imagine that having that mentoring and support and encouragement helps them push on through. So there's certainly a lot that you're bringing there. So you've got the public, people who downloaded it, tune in every week, send you emails, check out your Substack. They're giving you that feedback. It's really immediate and they're your audience at the end of the day, but also your peers, the experts within your space, the world-class people you're competing against, and the people who are judging that. It means a lot that, Fortnum and Mason certainly know their grub. If they're saying that what you're doing is really adding value, then you can trust that. So I think there's something there for you about having the credibility and the trust and the respect and the regard of expert colleagues in your space who know what good looks like. And then the last bit was also then it was interesting that there was also the Impact Award actually came from academia, from educators. So actually, though you've been in that world, many people from the podcasting or broadcasting world may not have been. So I actually think it's really interesting that your work crosses both spectrums of academic rigor. It's perceived to be impactful on society, as well as enjoyable, pleasurable, well done, achieving what it said it was going to do.
It feels lovely to hear it. And I think that what I'm realizing more and more, not just in this moment with you, is that we need other people to reflect back what we've heard. I think that I've spent my entire life being freelance, doing it myself, pulling it out of the bag every day. And I do have enormous energy. I'm much luckier than a lot of freelancers. I don't suffer from the crashing downs anymore, but I certainly did in the old days, because certainly before social media, actually, where I couldn't pop in and say something and get some feedback, it was just about being alone. And particularly as a mum of younger children, trying to do all that juggling, it was really, really hard. So having somebody else to validate you, to reflect back what you're saying, to help you. I think that if everybody could have a coach, how amazing life could be. And that's not your partner, it's not your best friend, it is somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. I think that I've learned so much from talking to other people and listening to that reflection. I think that's certainly what I do as well. What I would like to really capture is that the value in me being that person who reflects back, me being that person who can bring all those peers together in a space and get people to have that reflection back on their ideas. It is about being curious, really curious, so that you are really listening. And the way that you've been picking up on what I've said shows that you're a super listener. And that's the kind of person that I think people need to have, because your mum's not going to tell you that. Your husband's not going to tell you that. Your best friend's probably not going to tell you that. Most people don't really listen to what you have to say.
I think as well that the multiplicity of choices that people need to make now and the amount of pivots that they can do means that listening environment is even more important. Because whereas a more orthodox mentoring relationship might have worked very easily if you were just doing one job and careering your way in a linear way up that, many careers are much more like a zigzag or an onion these days. They're about unfolding and exploring and experimenting. And in that vein, I think a critical friend, a true sounding board, become extremely valuable because you're trying to experiment at speed. And so having that capacity to really hear yourself think and have other people build on that, I think becomes even more valuable when it's less linear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Career hack. Gilly is a great example of the passion and clarity that can drive a career when you really know your equation, what you're good at, what you care about, how you make impact, and what environments work for you currently. She's been able to reinvent and to play and explore a variety of different mediums to really make use of her gifts in a way that you can hear is deeply rewarding. The equation can give you enough focus to really hone in on your sweet spot, but enough latitude to have room to experiment, play, and grow. Check out the Career Equation website for more about how to get started on yours.
You told me in your last moment that we're going to share is all about environment. And in the equation, we say that environment is really what makes the biggest difference, that you can have a job that really suits who you are in terms of your skill set, your interests, and the ways that you measure your results, your impact. But if you don't have an environment that supports you to be successful, it can be really quite difficult to make progress. So tell me about a time when the environment didn't support you to be at your best.
I think that my most challenging time was when my children were young. And I have a lot of energy, and I think it was just spinning out in all different directions. I was trying to be the best mum I could. I'd given up as my job as a TV producer and was at home. Much as I enjoyed looking after small people, I found them absolutely fascinating. I thought it was the best job. It was like an anthropologist meets a psychologist, meets a carer. I thought it was just the most wonderful thing. But of course, it is incredibly draining and quite boring a lot of the time. And most of my female peers had stayed in the workplace, and I felt that I'd let myself down as a feminist. I wasn't a good role model for my girls. I had all sorts of issues that I was fighting against all the time while trying to use my platform as a writer. And at that time, I was writing for parenting magazines about alternative health and alternative education, Montessori and Steiner and all that sort of stuff. I wanted to make a change, but it was really difficult to try and keep my energies in one place. But it was because I was alone. I teamed up with a friend and we wrote a guidebook to Brighton, and that was great fun, but we were rubbish business people, so that didn't really work. It worked for everybody else, but not for us.
I bought it.
I mean, everybody bought it. Even Nick Cave rang me and told me he bought it. We just never made any money out of it. It was very difficult to find that exterior validation, all the stuff that we were just talking about. It was also chaotic. It was making it up as we went along, and that's really hard. Bizarrely, social media saved my life. It really did. I didn't have any lifestyle to aspire to. I didn't feel jealous of anyone. All of the things that people say that social media feeds, I just didn't have any of that. And it was wonderful. It was great fun playing with communication. It was great fun telling stories. It was great fun being part of conversations. I was talking to people through my podcast work about the things that mattered most to me. Everything that food was about. It was about people and stories and identity and belonging and culture and politics and saving the planet and regenerative farming and soil health. Everything was in the food story. And as a podcaster, I was starting the conversations a lot of the time and seeing people copy me. That was great. In the old days, I'd have felt terribly upset about that. No way, fantastic. I've got plenty more ideas where that came from. It feels great to be there.
I really hear the difference between that quite isolated experience, juggling, fitting work in around your family, not having the same sense of community that I imagine you would have had on a TV production where you're all in it together and there's lots of camaraderie and familiarity, and how much then of a kind of community and energetic injection social media has been for you. And I think it's really great to hear someone say, actually, social media has been wonderful for me, because it does get lots of bad press, and for good reason. There are good and bad in it. But this communities of practice, the ability to start a conversation, join a conversation, speed up a conversation when it comes to campaigning and awareness, really sounds like something that's been a great asset for you, that you've used to be an asset to others, and continues to give you energy while you retain your independence. Sounds like you've got the right balance now.
It feels that way. Absolutely. Even in the last 24 hours, actually, I've been thinking about this place, the House of Dreams, as I call it, on social media. I want to build more of a community of change makers who come here. I want to encourage people who think like you do, who think like a lot of the people who come here. They're disruptors. They want more. They want to empower people to think differently about their business or the planet or food or yoga or whatever it is. I want to actively be part of that network. I want to change the conversation about retreat spaces. What I can do to curate that experience and bring people together so that they all meet each other as well. I'm very excited about that.
I love that it's not an either or, it's an and. And many people have been very excited by having the experience for the first time of working independently, working from home, taking the commute out, changing their lifestyle as a result of that. And it's still wonderful to go and sit alongside someone and collaborate. It's still an energizing experience to meet other people who want to do something like you but different, and to work together alongside each other, to see how tall they are, to break bread with them. All of those things are still an essential part of human nature. So it's really nice to hear you say it's an addition as well, isn't it? It's expanding your range and your reach and your colours, if you like.
Well, I was just going to say that from that very small child who was so isolated, my head online is full of people. My podcasting experience means that I'm constantly meeting the most interesting people that I could imagine. And I'm filling my house physically with people who are just so driven to make a change in their own life and who have so much to say. And with my help, they can really find their voice to say it.
Make that happen. That actually takes us really nicely into seeing if we can put all of this together into a way that might help you to distill your brand value and your impact. So we call this the career design statement. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, based on the reflections from our conversation, I'm going to ask you to fill in some gaps. And we're going to have a go at creating a design statement for you and to see how that might help inform what you want to do next. Are you up for having a go?
I am.
Okay, so luckily, the first gap is very simple. We just put our name in it. I,
Gilly Smith,
Gilly Smith, will use my skills in, give me 2 or 3 that you know are just the standouts now from what you've heard from yourself.
communicating and curating.
Nice. My skills in communicating, curating, and my passion for, so these are the pleasure elements, my passion for
Making change.
2, and here we're talking about how you're measuring impact, how you're measuring success, both for yourself and for those you serve. So 2, what would be the results?
To create a network of change makers.
Is there a so that on the back of that? Create a network of change makers, that or who? Curious.
Yeah. So that more people feel empowered to talk about what they really care about in the world.
And last bit, which is an environment that is, insert here, works best for me. So you can put as many things in there as you like, but what do we now know about the soil and the sun that helps Gilly be at her best? Can you give me a few words, components, characteristics?
An environment that is a blank canvas, inspired by nature, welcoming, nourishing, and supportive.
Varied? Does variety still get its place at the table?
Absolutely. Expansive.
So I, Gilly, will use my skills in communicating and curating and my passion for making change to create a network of change makers so that more people are empowered to talk about what they really care about. An environment that is a blank canvas, inspired by nature, that is welcoming, nourishing, supportive, expansive, and varied works best for me.
I'd go there.
How does it feel to hear that back? And also, how close are you to that? If we were going to score it out of 10, how are you doing already?
Pretty good. Pretty good. I think that what I need is to let people know about it. I need to communicate that experience.
What do you think might be the next step then in terms of being a bit more deliberate, a bit more out there about what you offer and how people can access it? What do you feel is going to be that next step?
I'm going to create a meeting of the mighty. I'm going to talk to all the amazing people who have been here to retreat already and the people who are in my life and are talking about making real change. And I'm going to get them to meet up. I am going to curate that experience and I'm going to see what we can do with this physical space that I have here. What could happen if I get some of them together and create a network so that there's a cross-pollination of those ideas, a little bit like the bees and the butterflies that are currently buzzing around in my wildflower meadows at the moment.
It is a very special place, your home, and the nature beyond. It really is incredible. And of course, people can find out about your work at Gilly Smith. You're on Instagram with @foodgillysmith, and you're also on LinkedIn a lot. And so those are good ways to find you, and we will pop those in the show notes so everyone can find you and the books. Tell me finally, when you think back to that little 7-8-year-old girl playing with the dolls, escaping into the world of story and narrative, what would the grown-up Gilly Smith have to say to that little one now, given what you know now about the adventures that work is taking on and is still taking
Well, I actively do this. I do take her by the hand because somebody showed me how to do that, to actually take little Gilly with you into your world. And so I do that quite often. And I can tell you, little Gilly is rather thrilled at what she turns out to be.
Oh, that's very moving, actually. I really see your little Gilly, a little sweaty palm still in yours and influencing and inspiring you still, as you've done for me and for all our listeners today. So I just want to say a big thank you, Gilly, for your generosity and your candor. And I hope that the experience of working through the formula of the equation has started to crystallize just how much value you do have to add and what the next steps might look like to do it.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Career Equation podcast.
Stay connected with us on socials for more career insights, behind-the-scenes moments, and updates on upcoming episodes. And if you'd like to work with us, visit the Career Equation website or click the links in the show notes.
Remember, the Career Equation isn't just a podcast, it's a journey towards unlocking your full potential, enjoying your life, and doing remarkable stuff.
Until next time, keep solving those career equations and pursuing your path to success.
And don't forget to share your thoughts and feedback with us. Your input shapes the future of our show.
Until next time, keep solving those career equations and pursuing your path to success. This is Erica Sosna
And Zoe Schofield. Signing off.